Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the outrage in Spain. Protesters say they can't take any more pain, but the Prime Minister's still announcing new austerity measures. Also, the deadly side of the Farnborough Airshow, we focus on the defence deals done, who's buying, who's selling, and how much it's all worth. And building a future in Gaza, the times are good for developers, but so many families still can't afford a decent home. Hello everyone, remember Greece? Debt, budget cuts, unemployment, violent protests on the streets of Athens? Well, Madrid was starting to look a lot like that this week as the reality of austerity in Spain came down, and came down hard. It's all looking so familiar, isn't it? Debt that can't be serviced, deals with the European Union to work around it, and ultimately, scenes like these when the people learn the ugly truth. Thousands of miners and their families and friends marching towards Madrid. Some had walked for days, trudging along for 400 kilometres from the mining towns and villages in the north. They fear massive job cuts are on the way.
A lot of people were waiting for a group of workers to stand up for their rights, so that society could react, because politicians are not doing their job properly.
They arrived in Madrid in the early hours of Wednesday morning, just as their Prime Minister was preparing to deliver more bad news. Sales taxes were going up, unemployment benefit was going down. It was necessary, he said, to convince the EU that Spain was serious about getting its finances in order.
We haven't got a freedom to choose. The circumstances are not that generous, and the only choice we've got is to accept these sacrifices, to give up some things, or otherwise to give it all up. The only question which should be asked, will these reductions help? My answer is yes, they will.
The protesters were outraged.
It is the biggest injustice carried out in this country against the working class, carrying out these cuts the government wants. I believe it is more important in these times to support workers, miners in this case, with government subsidies, than helping bankers as they are.
Our reporter Tim Friend, who'd been with the miners on part of their journey, was there when things got ugly.
The atmosphere here now is extremely tense. The riot police are on standby as the demonstrators wait to hear the speeches. At the moment, there's a standoff. It remains peaceful, but there have been confrontations in the past between armed officers and protesters.
And a little later there were isolated skirmishes. Protesters hurled stones and fireworks. Police responded with plastic bullets. There were a number of people injured. And yet at the start of the week, things actually looked good for Spain. The EU had agreed to loan the banks billions of euros and give it an extra year to bring down the budget deficit. But in return, we now see Prime Minister Rajoy had to make more cuts. Here are the numbers. The aim is to cut the budget deficit by almost $80 billion over 2.5 years. But to do that, sales tax will go up from 18 to 21%, and there'll be cuts to unemployment benefits and civil service pay as well. So let's talk more all about this with David Lizoain, who's joining us from Barcelona. He is a blogger at the Social Europe Journal and the Economy and Europe Secretary for the Socialist Youth of Spain. David, thank you for your time. It is easy to understand the anger of the people, the miners, the civil servants who started striking as well. But wasn't it all kind of inevitable in a way? You know, looking at this and thinking basically it's turning into Greece.
Well, I don't think we should be particularly surprised by the reforms that were announced, because they'd already been announced via Europe. These are a series of European recommendations. They recommended changes to the pension system, which involved cuts. They recommended cuts to unemployment benefits. They recommended a tax increase. What is surprising is that the Spanish government has ceded so much sovereignty, because now these recommendations are binding, and there will be new and probably more socially unjust recommendations that will also be binding. So in this sense, we are going in the direction of Greece, but who would have thought that a country the size of Spain and the size of Spain's economy would put up with what I consider to be a national humiliation?
Yeah, but there's no alternative though, is there? Or is there? You tell me.
Well, there absolutely is an alternative, and that is for different decisions to be made at the European level. Let's remember that these are incredibly harsh measures that are being taken to save a series of reckless private banks. It's not really clear why the citizens of Spain would be forced to pay more for their medicine, why the unemployed would be receiving fewer benefits, why the elderly would be receiving lower pensions again for the problem with these banks. And the alternative again is at the European level, and it would be in this case for the European Central Bank to be purchasing directly the bonds of the Spanish state, or for the European Stability Mechanism to be granted a banking license and to intervene directly in the Spanish banks.
To bring up the sort of Greece comparison again, and I am wary of doing that, but I think there are certainly some similarities. This is all short-term stuff we're talking about, really. The bailouts only solve short-term problems, and Spain, like Greece, has long-term liquidity problems. How long do you think Spain is looking at this sort of pain? Maybe not at this extreme level, but this sort of austerity. How long?
Well, first I would differentiate between Spain and Greece, just to point out that Greece certainly had a problem of public spending and excess of public debt, and in Spain it's a problem of private debt. But all this austerity is doing in Spain is changing a problem of private debt into a problem of public debt, because the austerity is self-defeating. The more you cut, the more government revenue falls, the less economic activity there is, and the worse things become. So, this is a downward spiral that could be unending. The real question is, when will we see a change in direction of 180 degrees?
Any thoughts on, and it's an awful thing to have to think about, but any thoughts on who's next? For so long we were saying, oh, Spain will be next, and well, lo and behold it is.
Well, I hope no one is next, but I would certainly be worried if I were a citizen of Italy at this point, because let's say they're under similar pressure from the markets, and they've already had a technocratic government imposed, and I'd say they're next in the sights, but this is terrible. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I certainly wouldn't have wished it upon Greece. And we've seen just how bad things have gotten there, and yeah, this is sort of a wave of social disaster that's going to be spreading from the European periphery and eventually touch the core.
Thank you, though, David Lizoain, for your thoughts and your time on Counting the Cost. And still ahead this week on Counting the Cost, we're going to hear from Warren Buffett's son on a new effort to beat world hunger, plus this. Trading on testosterone, a former Wall Street trader turned Cambridge scientist tells us about the psychology of risk and the difference between winning and losing millions. Right now, though, we are headed to the Farnborough Airshow in southern England, one of the traditional battlegrounds of the big two airplane makers, Boeing and Airbus. We're looking, though, at where the even bigger money is made, the military spend. Think of companies like Sikorsky, which makes this, the famous Black Hawk helicopter. I know Sikorsky's clinched an $8.5 billion deal with the US Army and Navy to build them, Black Hawks and Seahawks as well, over the next 5 years. There are fighter jets to think about too. This one, the Eurofighter Typhoon, which is in a real dogfight with others, of course, for the business there. But the interesting thing here is that as the US cuts billions off its defence budget, manufacturers are now looking to Gulf and Asian countries with cash to spare for this sort of hardware. Have a look at this now from Rory Challens at the Airshow in Farnborough.
The aerial acrobatics can always be counted on to impress the crowds here. Such death-defying stunts are breathtakingly impressive. But as the jets shrieked through the heavy clouds of southern England, the real business was going on down below. The halls and stalls thronged with civil and defence buyers, consulting their shopping lists and trying out the latest gadgets. The next generations of fighter pilots are trained in simulators like this, but while the defence companies can realistically recreate flying conditions, they can't simulate good business conditions, and these are worrying times for the world's biggest weapons makers. Sikorsky make the famous Black Hawk helicopters relied on by the US military, but the company's executives are trying not to rely on them too much in return.
These are going to be challenging times for Sikorsky aircraft. Because of the pressure on US DoD defense budgets, we do expect to continue to preserve our business at its current levels over the next few years. And we'll be successful in doing that so long as we continue to make progress on the international marketplace and continue to sell our products and services abroad.
Russia is facing even greater challenges. The state arms exporter, Rosoboronexport, has a big presence here. It has to. Recent geopolitical events have closed off some of its most reliable markets.
They've had big hits recently, losing Libya, now they're losing Syria. They're also losing out in India, which was another traditional market they used to monopolise. Western companies are now starting to take big inroads into India, whereas previously that would have been a market that Russia could rely on for arms sales.
Rich Middle Eastern and Asian countries are taking up some of the slack left by dwindling US and European defence budgets, but the fight for international business will only intensify over the coming years.
Now, the son of America's billionaire investor Warren Buffett has been talking to us here at Al Jazeera about his latest project to tackle world hunger. It's called the Global Food Security Index, and we're going to hear more about that in a moment. First, though, just a bit about Howard Buffett and his family's extraordinary empire. He is Warren's eldest son, will become non-executive chairman of his investment company, Berkshire Hathaway, when his father, who is 81, eventually steps down. Berkshire owns many big brands, including General Ray, Dairy Queen, See's Candy, and has a significant stake in some really big names, Coca-Cola, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, and many others. But it's not just about corporate investment. Just this past week, Buffett Sr. handed out nearly $2 billion worth of Berkshire stock, most of it to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all part of a plan to gradually give away most of his $44 billion fortune. But back to Buffett Jr., Howard that is. He spoke to Anand Naidu, who began by asking about what he hoped to achieve with his Global Food Security Index.
Well, the index is going to track a number of different things in terms of food accessibility, availability, and so I think what it'll tell us over time is the impact that specific things such as food spikes and other things that occur in the agricultural community and the global community have and how they have an impact on different populations in different countries. And that should help us analyze better what some of the solutions might be.
Well, let's talk about Berkshire Hathaway, your father's company. Are you going to be taking over?
Well, that's been discussed for a long time. I mean, the truth is I won't be taking over for him. That's going to be divided into different pieces. So I'll be a non-executive chairman. There'll be a CEO who really runs the operations of the company, and then there'll be several different people involved in investments. And actually, we've already the company's already hired 2 great people who are involved in this and are continuing to grow their involvement. So really, you know, my job and the whole scope of it is pretty minor, I think.
What kind of advice does your father give you about investing?
Well, you know, he'll give us, all of us kids, advice occasionally from time to time if we ask for it. But he holds his cards pretty close to his vest.
What do you think are the biggest risks that the global economy is facing right now?
The economy. I think that if you look at Europe, you look at the United States, Asia seems to be hanging in there a little bit better. We have huge challenges that I think any individual can understand it on a very simple level, which is if we ran our household the way governments have been running governments, we'd all be bankrupt. We have a serious challenge. We have a big hole we've dug, and it's going to take a lot to get out of it. And how we manage our way out of that is going to be the biggest challenge I think we'll be facing.
So, where are you putting your money right now?
I'll tell you what, I learned a long time ago not to give that answer. You won't get that out of me.
And from a world of billionaires to a place where poverty's been simply a way of life for many. We're talking the Gaza Strip, which has seen its share of hard times in recent years through war and an Israeli economic blockade. Despite that, Gaza's economy is on track for more growth this year, mostly driven by aid, but also by construction. Melissa Chan looks now at the skyrocketing property prices in Gaza.
The building blocks of Gaza's economy. Construction is the only sector in the territory these days where you see any progress. High-rise buildings are shooting up, and it's also meant employment for some in this tough labor market. Abdullah Abu Hussein is one of the biggest real estate investors in Gaza. He bought this land 3 months ago and now sells individual plots off at a huge profit.
Businessmen in Gaza have been putting their money in property rather than commercial opportunities because it's less risky.
Israel's blockade has meant irregular supplies of material for commercial enterprises such as manufacturing. But the construction business keeps going thanks to cement smuggled through tunnels from Egypt. If everything goes according to schedule, we'll see an apartment block here in about a year. What we're witnessing is a positive development for Gaza, a contribution to its economy. But the homes here will not meet the needs of most people. For the rest of Gaza, this remains the reality. People in poverty, with no jobs, dependent on international aid, and worried not about real estate, but about the very basics, such as their next meal. These are the Palestinians who need extra space the most, but home ownership is a dream.
We'd love to move out, but land is too expensive. We even considered selling our home to fund the purchase of property, but we'd still fall short of the necessary cash.
Gaza's economy is growing, but it's uneven. Palestinians with money may bet on real estate, but the rest of the economy remains at a standstill.
The middle class, the refugee people, the fresh graduate, those in the private, the employee of the private sector are in need for a flat, but they cannot. So the supply is not targeting the real demand.
And there's the irony. Plenty of people who need homes but can't afford them. And yet plenty of tantalizing new homes just ready for residency.
Now, just a quick update on last week's big story, the LIBOR scandal in the UK. You'll remember Barclays Bank was fined more than $450 million for its part in manipulating that crucial interest rate. And its top 3 bosses had to resign in disgrace. This week, Chairman Marcus Aegis went before a panel of, shall we say, sceptical MPs. And it was then we learned from him that the bank's former CEO, Bob Diamond, had given up bonuses worth almost $30 million, though some say that was the least he could do, considering the scandal. Meanwhile, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England tried to clear up the matter of whether he encouraged Barclays to manipulate the LIBOR rate. He denied even knowing the rate was being tampered with.
Do you think, are you aware of LIBOR having been manipulated since 2008 by any bank submitters?
No.
So you're not aware of it, or it hasn't happened?
We're not aware of it, other than what is starting to come out of these investigations.
And so if LIBOR had been manipulated since 2008, would the Bank of England take any responsibility for failing to deal with its knowledge that LIBOR had been falsified, or would it see that as somebody else's responsibility?
We didn't have any knowledge. I didn't have any knowledge of this. I've said...
but you do now. I'm saying you did since 2008.
Well, we have since 2008, since the investigations.
Okay, so only since a month ago was the Bank of England aware that LIBOR had been falsified.
This was a cesspit, yes.
Now, of course, the Barclays traders and others in the financial world do take risks. We talked about this last week. Sometimes sailing a bit close to the edge, if not completely over it. And there's been an unusual study, too, of financial traders which tries to explain their behaviour and, in turn, the movement in the markets. It was former Wall Street trader turned neuroscientist John Coates, who argues that risk-taking transforms our body chemistry. He has a book, it's called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf. He looks at how volatility in the markets even affect the hormone production of traders. Coates focuses on 2 hormones. The first, of course, testosterone, which increases the appetite for risk. When profits rise during a boom, so do testosterone levels, which leads to extreme euphoria, a bit of overconfidence maybe, and in many cases, reckless investments. The other is called cortisol. It's also known as the stress hormone. So it's the opposite. As market sentiment worsens, the body will secrete more cortisol. But that makes traders shy away from even favourable bets and contributes perhaps to a period of busts. So John Coates put all this together, and I'm pleased to say he's with us from our London studio to talk more about the psychology of trading. Thank you for your time, John. What made you, first of all, go from Wall Street trader to neuroscience at Cambridge?
Well, I became aware of the fact that when I was running a trading desk, that my body and signals from my body were playing a huge role in the decisions I was making. And economics has always assumed that economic decision-making, our financial risk-taking, was a purely cognitive activity. It was a matter of calculating returns, probabilities, the optimal allocation of capital. But anybody who's taken large financial risks knows that when they do so, their body is fully involved. Their heart rates speed up, their blood pressure increases, their immune system stands on high alert. They get a flood of adrenaline, and the steroid hormones, cortisol and testosterone, flood into their system. And these are unmistakable things to feel. But economics had never actually taken it seriously, that this is something that might be influencing our decisions. I thought that was a serious oversight, so I decided to go back to Cambridge to scientifically investigate the idea.
What about the banks themselves? Because we talked on last week's show about how traders take big risks, but the banks reward them. Isn't that the problem? You know, if they're successful, they get rewarded by their employers, so they are really just being encouraged to take bigger risks.
Yeah, I mean, what goes on in the trading floor, it's not pure biology, it's biology that's encouraged by risk management and by bonus schemes. So we seem to have this biology that lends itself to instability. When things are going really well, our entire biology gears up and encourages us to take more risk. And unfortunately, that tendency is exaggerated by the risk management system that increases risk limits of a trader on a winning streak and then does the opposite during a crisis. So we sort of have both nature and nurture conspiring to make these disasters. And in the book, I kind of show how these two factors, the inside and the institutional arrangement, cooperate to produce the sort of what we see in the financial markets.
So, then having written the book, having done the research, what would you actually advise to traders to do to make money but avoid the catastrophes?
Well, you know, that's a tough question. I focus at the end of the book on three levels of advice: the individual level of the management, and the level of the market. On an individual level, we have to recognize that biological instability can shift our risk preferences dramatically. So traders on a winning streak become full of themselves. They think that they're infallible. So they put on ever-increasing size trades with worse and worse risk-reward trade-offs. The traders have to learn to recognize that this is happening. And I think the people who can help them recognize that the best are sports scientists, because this is something they do with athletes all the time. They work with the biology in the interest of optimizing performance. The level of the bank itself or the hedge fund, I think the risk managers have to be aware of the biology as well and realize that traders on a winning streak are more likely to be the ones that are going to blow up the bank. It's not the losing traders. It's always traders that are at the tail end of a multi-year winning streak that end up losing, $1 or $2 billion. So I think risk managers have to learn to pull their winning traders off the trading floor for a while, let their biology reset. On a larger scale, I think if the biology is playing a role in shifting risk preferences systematically across the cycle, you could dampen that source of volatility. That, of course, is not the only source of volatility. Interest rates, regulatory environment are extremely important as well. But you could eliminate that source of instability if you had more women and older men managing money, because they have very different biologies from young men.
Okay. You mentioned instability there. I think it's very fair to say there's been a deep crisis in banking, and it's hurt people and it's hurt businesses all around the world. Do you think they've actually learned some lessons? Can things change? Could people look at, studies like yours and actually take them into account and change the culture?
Well, I think risk management right now is in a bit of a crisis. I think they've been relying on statistical metrics to give them a snapshot of the risk inherent in the bank's positions, and I think most risk managers realize that model hasn't been terribly successful in either predicting or managing the credit crisis, because what it misses are these subterranean shifts in the behavior of their traders. So I think there's a real appetite right now in the financial world to understand more fully the biology behind risk-taking.
Right. Really interesting stuff, John. John Coates, thank you for that on the psychology of trading.
Thank you.
And that is where we're going to leave you for this week. If you want to get in touch with the show, though, 3 easy ways to do it. Twitter is couple of them, either me at Kamal AJE or Al Jazeera's business editor at Abid Oliver Ali. Emails there as well, countingthecost@aljazeera.net. And while you're online, you can head over to aljazeera.com/business. There's a Counting the Cost link at the top there. It'll take you to our page. All our episodes are up there in full for you to catch up on whenever you would like. That's it though for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.